Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving into an event often overshadowed by its more famous predecessor, but one that fundamentally reshaped medieval Europe and the Middle East, the Second Crusade. You've handed us a stack of fascinating sources, everything from medieval chronicles to deep modern historical analyses, and our mission, as always, is to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, basically giving you a shortcut to being truly well-informed about this truly continental conflict. What makes this deep dive so compelling is that this wasn't just one campaign. It was a sprawling, multi-front phenomenon with wildly different results across the map. Some parts saw triumphs, while others were quite literally disastrous. Get ready for some truly surprising turn.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Witnessing how quickly a regional crisis could escalate into a continent-wide mobilization back in the 12th century. It powerfully reflects a growing sense of shared identity, a purpose within what we call Latin Christendom, that collective Christian world of Western Europe, united sort of by the Pope. That's a truly remarkable development for the mid-12th century. In this deep dive, we'll explore not just what happened, but why it mattered, connecting the dots between the intricate political maneuvering, the fervent spiritual beliefs, and the stark military realities across three very distinct theaters of war.
So let's set the scene, shall we? The year is 1144, and the Crusader states in the Levant, established almost half a century earlier after the First Crusade, are suddenly plunged into deep peril. The county of Edessa, a crucial Frankish outpost captured way back in 1098, has fallen, its conqueror. A truly formidable new opponent named Zengi, the ruler of Mosul and Aleppo.
Right, Zengi. Our sources paint a vivid picture of him as an undefeated warrior chieftain. He'd spent the previous decade consolidating a powerful state. He was expanding so rapidly and efficiently that even the Emir Unar of Damascus, a fellow Muslim ruler, felt compelled to form an unlikely alliance with the Crusaders of Jerusalem against him.
Wow, that tells you a lot, doesn't it, about Zengi's singular power, making him the most powerful single opponent yet faced by the Crusaders in the region.
Indeed. And his reputation was complex, not universally admired even among his own people. Ibn al-Qalanisi, a chronicler from Damascus, offers a particularly scathing account. He vividly recounts Zengi's treacherous dealings with the garrison of Baalbek, describes Zengi violating pledges and executing defenders owing to a personal grudge and irritation. Really quite brutal stuff.
But others saw him differently.
Yes, in stark contrast, many of the Turkish warrior elite saw him as their best, maybe their only chance, to truly drive out the Crusaders. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Edessa's vulnerability wasn't solely down to Zengi's power. Internally, the Crusader states faced significant self-inflicted challenges. Our sources tell us about the long-standing feuds between Raymond of Poitiers, the powerful prince of Antioch, and Jocelyn II of Edessa.
Ah, right. Territorial disagreements mainly.
Primarily, yes. This deep-seated disunity meant there was no strong, unified Frankish front to present against Zengi's rising influence.
And then, as if the political squabbles weren't enough, tragedy struck.
Exactly. The tragic death of King Fulk of Jerusalem in late 1143. A hunting accident near Acre. This created a perilous power vacuum. Fulk was described by chroniclers as a wise ruler and a capable military commander. He'd done much to bolster the kingdom's defenses, overseeing the construction of important frontier castles like Currach.
So his loss was huge.
Massive. While his widow, Queen Melisande, was undoubtedly capable and ruled diligently with their 13-year-old son Baldwin III, Fulk's sudden death presented a moment of welcome opportunity for Zengi. He felt ready to mount a major offensive against the Crusaders. So with Jocelyn II away in Antioch seeking aid, a sign of that very disunity we just discussed, and Edessa's garrison severely lacking troops,
Zengi makes his move.
He launched a surprise attack in November 1144. Raymond of Antioch, despite pleas, infamously refused to help. Queen Melisande quickly organized a relief expedition from Jerusalem, but it was just too late. The siege was brutal. Zengi's catapults, his miners, they breached the walls, leading to what sources call a brutal sack and carnage. Ibn al-Qalanisi describes widespread plundering, violence filling the city. Michael the Syrian recounts the horrific scene of clergy being cut down, desperately clutching sacred relics in their churches. Just awful.
A complete disaster for the Franks.
Utterly. While Zengi later tried to win the goodwill of the Greek and Armenian Christians by protecting them, even granting some authority to the Jacobite bishop, any Franks found were immediately put to death. The fall of Edessa was a moment of vital strategic importance. It left northern Syria far more vulnerable, Antioch more exposed than ever before. Zengi did try to press his advantage immediately, actually. He besieged Damascus again in 1145, but that particular siege failed, which for a moment offered a tiny glimmer of hope.
Still, the news of Edessa's fall itself, it shocked the Latin world, a brutal wake-up call. Urgent appeals for aid were dispatched to the Christian kingdoms of the West. Messengers relaying dire reports that Jerusalem itself was in peril. This begged an important question. What was needed? What could they possibly do?
The answer that quickly emerged was another crusade, and it had to be immediate. Pope Eugenius III, a former monk from the austere Cistercian order known for their strict asceticism, emphasis on manual labor, reformist zeal, he wasted no time. He issued the papal bull Quantum Predecessores on December 1st, 1145.
Quantum Predecessores, and what did it say?
Well, it explicitly recalled the glorious victories of the First Crusade, called on the knights of Christendom to emulate the deeds of their forefathers. It passionately urged them to take the cross for the reconquest of Edessa, emphasizing that the defense of the holy places was the collective responsibility of Europe's knightly elite.
Setting a high bar.
Definitely. And notably, he also urged knights to shun finery, fur-lined garments, gilded armor, and hunting dogs and hawks, setting a very specific moral tone, signaling a departure from worldly vanity for a higher spiritual purpose. It was a clear attempt to purify the crusading ideal, ensure moral rectitude.
Now that's a powerful message. But who had the charisma, the influence to actually mobilize an entire continent for something like this?
This is where Bernard of Clairvaux comes into the picture. He was, without doubt, the mid-12th century's most influential churchman, revered throughout Europe as a living saint. Our sources paint him as a truly striking figure, possessing profound charisma and eloquence.
And the Pope knew him well.
Knew him well is an understatement. Pope Eugenius himself had been one of Bernard's monks and pupils. This gave Bernard unparalleled influence over the papacy. Bernard was also instrumental in defining a new chivalry, this idea of knighthood blended with spiritual vows, most notably exemplified by the newly established military orders like the Knights Templar.
So he's shaping the very idea of what a knight should be.
Exactly. For Bernard, a warrior's true calling was to renounce pride and wealth and commit himself to the defense of Christendom. He cast the crusade as a gift from God, a showering of blessings upon the warriors of the age, stressing how fortunate they were to live in an era of unique blessings from God. He also masterfully used feudal language, referring to the Holy Land as Christ's lands.
Implying a duty, like a vassal to a lord.
Precisely. A sacred obligation to protect his lord's domain. His ideas would shape the Church's approach to the Crusades for centuries, presenting participation not just as a duty, but as a privileged opportunity for divine favor and salvation. He preached the cross with incredible fervor across France and Germany. King Louis VII of France, described as tender-hearted and courteous, pious and serious, was deeply influenced. He consulted Bernard as though he were an oracle.
He really bought into it.
Completely. At Vézelay on March 31st, 1147, in a dramatic, almost theatrical public ceremony, Louis received the cross directly from Bernard. The enthusiasm was apparently so overwhelming that even Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine took the pilgrim's vow. Bernard famously tore his own habit into strips to make more crosses for the Eagle volunteers. Just imagine the scene.
Incredible. And he convinced the German king, too, Conrad III.
Yes. Later that year, at Spire Cathedral during Christmas Mass, Bernard delivered an equally powerful sermon to Conrad III, the tall, brawny king of the Germans. He portrayed Christ's judgment if Conrad refused to answer the call. And Conrad, profoundly moved, wept openly and pledged his service.
Wow, so this was monumental, the King of France and the Holy Roman Emperor. Two of Christendom's most important rulers agreeing to lead. That's unprecedented power, isn't it?
Absolutely unprecedented for a crusade. It promised a massive mobilization of power and resources.
So the stage is set for this huge mobilization towards the Holy Land, but then something unexpected happens. The crusade starts to grow beyond its initial scope.
Exactly. What began as a relief expedition for Edessa quickly grew into something far larger than even St. Bernard initially imagined. Our sources call it the first truly continental crusading effort of the Middle Ages, and it really diversified the scope of what it meant to take the cross.
How so? Where else did it expand?
Well, in the Iberian Peninsula, for instance, King Alfonso I of Portugal and King Alfonso VII of Leon Castile asked that the crusade be extended to their ongoing battle against the Almoravids.
The Almoravids, the powerful Berber Muslim dynasty ruling much of southern Spain at the time.
That's them. And for years, popes had been issuing specific crusade bulls for the wars against the Moors in Spain. So this felt like a natural extension, linking the centuries-long Reconquista to the larger crusading movement, making it seem like one continuous holy war against a common enemy.
Okay, Iberia makes sense.
Yeah.
Anywhere else?
Yes, simultaneously a similar request emerged from the eastern frontier of the German Empire. Henry the Lion, a powerful Saxon duke, wanted to lead a crusade against the pagan Wends.
The Wends. Those were various Slavic tribes living between the Elbe and Vistula rivers.
Correct. This request, formalized by Saxon nobles and knights on March 13, 1147, explicitly linked their struggle. They described it as fighting a threat to the local Christians who carried God's people into bondage. They linked this directly with the wider call to oppose God's enemies everywhere, not just in Palestine.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
So the critical question then becomes, why did the Pope and Bernard agree to expand it so much beyond the Holy Land?
Well, the Pope rarely refused one of Bernard's requests. That's part of it. And formally, the Second Crusade was extended to include these new fronts, with the crucial promise that those battling the Wends and Moors would gain the same spiritual merits as knights traveling all the way to Syria.
The same spiritual rewards. That's huge.
It effectively made the Second Crusade the first international project of the Crusades, a vast, interconnected, holy enterprise.
And here's where we get a truly groundbreaking aha moment.
Yeah.
Regarding the nature of crusading itself.
Absolutely. What's particularly fascinating and frankly quite unsettling is Bernard's insistence regarding the Wendish Crusade. He insisted its object must be spiritual, and he issued this striking, almost ruthless condition.
Which was?
We utterly forbid that for any reason whatsoever a truce should be made with these people, either for the sake of money or for the sake of tribute, until such a time as by God's help they shall be either converted or wiped out.
Convert or die. That's incredibly stark.
It is. Jonathan Riley Smith, a prominent historian, points out that this was the first time crusading included such a ruthless maxim, and it seemingly contradicted Bernard's own past statements that conversion must never be forced. This isn't just a historical curiosity. It fundamentally changed the definition of a holy war for generations, moving from defense or pilgrimage to outright extermination or forced conversion as a legitimate objective.
That's a massive shift in thinking. A dark precedent.
Definitely. It highlights a stark divide between an uncompromising vision of spiritual purity and the realities of war and politics on the frontiers, where pragmatic treaties and tribute payments were actually quite common. So this extension of the crusade meant that those taking the cross in 1147 had their choice: Spain, Central Europe, or the Holy Land.
But did this spread the forces too thin? Was that a concern?
It certainly became one. Would this stretch the forces of Latin Christendom too thin? Potentially diluting the main effort in the East, which was, after all, the original objective.
It's a profound point to consider.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pivot now to where the crusade actually saw resounding success, the Iberian Peninsula. While the main action was brewing for the Holy Land, the Iberian Crusade was already underway by early 1147. Led by local rulers long accustomed to crusading, and with very clear objectives, you said.
Exactly. The campaign for Lisbon in particular stands out. King Alfonso I of Portugal, the first-named king of Portugal, he is described as one of medieval Europe's truly remarkable rulers. He was closely allied with the Knights Templar, even describing himself as a brother in the fraternity of the Templars. He granted them key frontier castles, relied on their military prowess.
Smart move.
Very. In March 1147, he swiftly captured Santarem, a strategic stronghold. This gained him control of the Tagus River Passage and effectively isolated Lisbon, positioning himself for what would become his greatest campaign.
And the timing was good.
Impeccable. In April 1147, a significant fleet of crusaders, maybe 164 ships and 13,000 men from Cologne, Flanders, and England, unexpectedly dropped anchor at Porto.
Just happened to be there.
Right place, right time. Bishop Pedro of Porto, a skilled orator apparently, urged them to join Alfonso's cause, emphasizing the meritorious nature of the war against the Moors. There was some initial debate. Some crusaders wanted to go directly to the Holy Land, arguing their vows were for Jerusalem.
But Alfonso persuaded them.
He did. His offer of a share in the city's plunder and trading privileges throughout Portugal, which would be generational, proved incredibly attractive. It swayed the undecided. Harvey of Glanville, a prominent English nobleman, became a powerful advocate for joining the Portuguese, and his advocacy won out.
So the siege begins.
July 1st, 1147. Alfonso blockaded Lisbon from land. The multinational fleet cut off its sea access. The Muslims of Lisbon resisted bravely for 6 weeks. Our sources detail the grim conditions inside, hunger and disease taking hold rapidly, and the innovative tactics of the Crusaders, like digging mines under the walls, building an enormous movable tower to assault the defenses.
And Lisbon falls.
On October 24, 1147, just a week after Almeria fell further south, Lisbon finally surrendered. While the king allowed defenders to leave, the city was brutally sacked. Many lives lost in the chaotic aftermath. But this victory dramatically expanded Portugal's frontier, a major development in the ongoing Reconquista. And from a strategic perspective, surely such a victory is exactly what St. Bernard envisioned for the western arm of the crusade.
That's a stark contrast to what we'll discuss later. So what made Iberia such a success story compared to other fronts? Why did it work here?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? In Iberia, the success stemmed from local rulers long accustomed to crusading leading the charge, rather than distant European monarchs attempting to impose a foreign strategy. This context was absolutely crucial. The Portuguese and Castilian kings had clear, long-term strategic goals deeply intertwined with their existing conflicts. Their efforts were far more focused, more sustained.
And Leon Castile's campaign for Almeria. Similar story.
Very similar. Strategic and well executed. King Alfonso VII of Leon Castile, he was an intriguing figure. Styled himself Emperor of all Spain, clearly blending crusading ideals with the dreams of Spanish reconquest. He actively invited the Pope to extend the crusade to his realm, seeking redemption of their souls through the war against the Almoravids.
And he made alliances, too.
Crucially, yes, Alfonso welcomed the Genoese, a powerful maritime republic. They viewed Almeria as a nest of pirates preying on their Mediterranean trade. So they saw an opportunity to both destroy an enemy and gain from one of the Mediterranean's wealthiest ports.
A pragmatic alliance, then.
Very much so. They formed a very formal pact. Alfonso provided land forces and 30,000 maravedis. Genoa supplied a fleet, troops, and critical siege equipment. In return, they received a third of all conquests and trade exemptions, a clear demonstration of the pragmatic economic drivers behind some crusading efforts.
This sounds like a template for success. Clear objectives, local leadership, and pragmatic alliances.
Precisely. And this powerful alliance quickly led to success. After capturing key strongholds like Calatrava and Baeza, Alfonso's combined forces, joined by King Garcia Ramirez of Navarre and Count Ramon Berenguer IV of Aragon-Barcelona, laid siege to Almeria, described as a rich, thriving port with maybe 28,000 people.
Did they try to buy him off?
They did, an offer of 100,000 maravedis to withdraw, but Alfonso refused, sensing a decisive victory. On October 17th, 1147, Almeria surrendered. This was the crowning achievement of Alfonso's career. The Genoese were demonstrably proud of their accomplishment.
And the momentum continued.
It did, into 1148 with the capture of Tortosa, Fraga, Lerida, and Mequinenza by Ramon Berenguer, effectively reversing previous Almoravid gains. The Second Crusade truly put a stamp on the collapse of the Almoravid Empire. They continually failed to relieve their strongholds, a testament to their internal decay.
So the gains were significant.
Bernard Riley summarizes them well. Portugal's border carried permanently south to Lisbon. The entire Ebro basin fell to Aragon, Barcelona. Leon Castile cleared the plain of Castilla Nueva, establishing a strong position in the upper Guadalquivir. And the assistance from Germany, Italy, France, England, and other regions and kingdoms made these successes truly multinational. These were unquestionably dramatic gains and stand in stark contrast to the unfolding events on other fronts.
Okay, let's turn now to the less straightforward, more ambiguous story of the Northern Front, the Wendish Crusade. This was part of the Second Crusade. Bernard secured papal sanction for a summer campaign in 1147 against the pagan Slavs, the Wends. Our sources describe this as setting the tone for perhaps the most radical and effective association of crusading and territorial expansion. The true start of the Northern Crusades, which would last for centuries, right?
Yeah.
Reshaping the Baltic region.
Exactly. And for the Saxons who championed this, the prize wasn't purely spiritual. It was clearly also the wealth of new conquests. An appeal from as early as 1108 for our Jerusalem in this region highlights the idea wasn't entirely new. Talk of land rich in meat, honey, corn, and birds, definitely a potent economic incentive alongside the spiritual call to arms.
And the Wends themselves, who were they?
Various Slavic tribes living between the Elbe and Vistula, practicing a lively polytheistic religion directed by a powerful priestly class. Prince Nicolad of the Abatrites was their most capable leader, and he was acutely aware of the preparations of the Crusaders gathering on his borders. He wasn't caught completely off guard.
And he struck first.
He did. What's fascinating here is Nicolad's strategic brilliance. He launched a preemptive strike in April 1147, devastating German settlements like Lübeck and Frisian villages. This bold move actually stiffened the sinews of the assembling armies. It seemingly proved the Wends were an immediate threat to Christendom and bolstered the Crusades' cause in the eyes of many.
So the Christian coalition responds. Who was involved?
It involved Danish forces under Kings Canute V and Sven III, Archbishop Albert of Bremen, and Duke Henry the Lion Saxons. They laid siege to Nicolad's fortress of Dobbin. It was surrounded by Martian Lake, making it difficult to assault. The Wends resisted fiercely, and critically, Nicolad's allies launched a counterattack on the Danish fleet.
Which succeeded.
Massively, a significant defeat for the Danes. It caused their kings to quickly cut their losses and withdraw from the crusade, greatly reducing the Christian coalition's strength.
So even with such a clear directive from Bernard convert or die, the reality on the ground was far messier. There was dissent.
Precisely. The Saxons continued the siege, ravaging the countryside, but, as one chronicler recorded, some nobles began to object, asking a very telling question. Is not the land we are devastating our land and the people we are fighting our people? Why are we destroying our own incomes?
So the ideal clashed with economic reality.
Exactly. It reveals a clear tension between the crusading ideal of conversion or destruction, as Bernard commanded, and the economic realities of territorial control, where tribute was often preferred by local lords seeking long-term revenue. The siege of Dobbin devolved into a costly stalemate. It led to a treaty where the garrison accepted baptism and freed prisoners. However, Nicolad's rule and his pagan system remained largely strong. These conversions were openly mocked as false by some chroniclers.
See, it's just tactical concessions.
Right. Not genuine spiritual transformations. A papal army did fight deeper into Wendish territory, destroying a pagan temple at Mieshoft. But another stalemate quickly developed at Demmin. They even found Stettin, a significant town, already Christian, which indicated surprising progress had already been made by other means, highlighting the complex religious landscape.
So how is the Wendish Crusade ultimately assessed?
Christopher Tyerman notes it petered out in a failed Saxon land grab, clearly failing its stated spiritual objective. While it produced minimal results in the immediate and was widely regarded as a disappointment compared to Iberia, historian Eric Christensen offers a different, more pragmatic perspective. He suggests if it had not been undertaken as a crusade, it would have seemed fairly successful from a purely military standpoint. It established Prince Nicolete as a tributary and ally, essentially bringing him into the German sphere of influence.
Which leaves us with a truly important question.
Why did the clergy imagine permanent conversion could be achieved through such a brutal military campaign? It set a significant and often violent precedent for the Northern Crusades, shaping the region for centuries to come.
Okay, now for the main event that most people associate with the Second Crusade, the campaigns led by the European monarchs in the Holy Land, this is where things get complicated, to say the least.
Understatement of the year.
Even before the main armies arrive, there was a brief moment of hope in Outremer, the Crusader states, right? News of Zengi's death in September 1146 was welcome among the Franks, as it plunged his emerging empire into chaos.
Correct. His sons, Mahmud and Nur-ed-Din, clashed over his legacy, leading to a period of instability. Count Jocelyn II of Edessa briefly reoccupied the city, seeing an opportunity. But when Nur-ed-Din, Zengi's most capable son, arrived with a large Turkish army, those prospects quickly evaporated.
What did Nur-ed-Din do?
He responded with brutal efficiency, massacred Edessa's population and razed the city to the ground, eliminating any possibility of Frankish reoccupation. This decisive and brutal act foreshadowed Nur-ed-Din's profound significance. He would become the most important enemy of the Frankish Crusader states for the next generation.
A grim backdrop indeed. So the German march begins. Conrad III sets off.
Yes, Conrad III and his German army departed Regensburg in May 1147, heading east. The exact size is unknown, but it was substantial. Estimates range widely, 7,000 to 13,000 maybe, or 10,000 to 20,000, a massive force for the time. But they faced issues right away. Though Emperor Manuel Comnenus of Byzantium negotiated an agreement for supplies, German discipline became lax once they reached Thrace, leading to violent clashes between locals and crusaders, a bad sign, foreshadowing deeper problems.
And what was the relationship like with the Byzantines? Given their past experiences with Crusader armies, it must have been tense.
Incredibly complex and fraught with peril for Manuel Comnenus. He was not at all happy about the prospect of a new crusade, deeply fearing it would be turned against his own lands, as had happened during the First Crusade. He had also just cultivated an anti-Sicilian coalition, a delicate diplomatic balance that a new crusade could easily disrupt. While he wanted to maintain good relations with Conrad due to family ties, Manuel's wife was Conrad's relative. There was deep mistrust on both sides.
Mutual suspicion.
Absolutely. The Byzantines worried intensely about hostile intentions from the Latin armies. The Crusaders were equally suspicious of the Byzantines, believing Manuel had made peace with the Seljuks out of treachery. After a tense month outside Constantinople, the Germans were finally ferried across the Bosphorus.
And Conrad didn't wait for the French.
No. What's fascinating here is Conrad's eagerness to press on without waiting, a decision that proved disastrous. His army divided. And for 10 grueling days, Conrad's contingent made a grueling trek across the treacherous interior of Asia Minor. Food ran desperately short, discipline broke down completely. They were constantly stalked by fans of Turkish horse archers.
Very effective tactic.
Lethal. Unlike the First Crusade's more cohesive army, Conrad's troops lacked cohesion and proved ideal prey. On October 25, near Dorylaeum, ironically, where the First Crusade had seen a significant victory, Conrad's army was ambushed by Sultan Masida I of Rum. The Turks executed their trap brilliantly, drawing German heavy cavalry into an early, ill-disciplined charge, separating them from their vulnerable infantry and then mauling both.
A total disaster.
Utterly. German casualties were atrocious, the retreat a total rout, the rearguard utterly wiped out. William of Tyre, a prominent chronicler, even accused Byzantine guides of sabotage, fueling that Crusader distrust. Though Conrad himself, with surprising honesty, placed the blame on himself, feeling that his own leadership had failed. A starving, shattered remnant, the German army limped back into Nicaea in early November. It effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force even before reaching the Holy Land. This was an ominous event for the French, setting a grim precedent.
Meanwhile, King Louis VII had to navigate his own treacherous path. He famously refused King Roger II of Sicily's offer to transport his army by sea, right? Largely fearing Roger's anti-Byzantine agenda.
Exactly, and reluctance to be leveraged into an attack on Constantinople. So, like the heroes of the First Crusade, he took the overland route. Louis's army was amply supplied by the Hungarians initially, but once they entered Bulgaria, a land belonging to the Greeks, their situation quickly deteriorated. Odo, Louis's chaplain, recorded that the Greeks stained themselves with perjury, closing cities, forcing pilgrims to procure supplies for themselves by plunder and pillage.
Not a good start with the locals.
Not at all. While Odo admits some blame lay with the Germans who came before, Louis's inability to assert universal discipline over all of his contingents resulted in widespread clashes, further fueling Byzantine mistrust.
So they get to Constantinople. How does Manuel treat Louis?
The French reached Constantinople between September and October 1147. Manuel, ever the shrewd diplomat, showered Louis with favors, lavish banquets, tours, yet within the Frankish camp, nobles and bishops were deeply distrustful of Manuel. Knowing he had made peace with the Seljuks, perceiving it as treachery, many even urged Louis to attack Constantinople itself, arguing it would be strategically better.
But Louis refused.
He absolutely refused, demonstrating a surprising moral fortitude perhaps, or maybe just pragmatic avoidance of confronting Byzantium directly. Manuel, keenly aware of these internal debates, pressured the French to cross the Bosphorus, leading to a new agreement of homage and a promise not to take imperial territory. However, Manuel ultimately refused to provide a Byzantine contingent, leaving the French largely to fend for themselves in Anatolia.
Which raises that question again. Leadership and logistics. How did they manage?
Poorly. Joining with the German survivors at Nicaea, the French pressed on, but they immediately faced lack of supplies, more clashes with locals, and desertions. Rumors spread relentlessly that Manuel was actively trying to weaken the crusade, perhaps providing bad info, holding back support. At Ephesus, Greek ambassadors warned of a large Turkish army advised wintering in Byzantine castles. But this hardly compensated for Manuel's highly cynical policy of failing to provide consistent provisions or a shadowing fleet. Especially after Conrad's illness allowed Manuel to pivot back to his German alliance, effectively abandoning the French in hostile territory.
So the French were largely on their own. How did they fare against the Turks?
Louis's army pressed onward, swinging inland towards Edessa, a port city. On Christmas Eve, they successfully repelled a Turkish attack, a small but important morale boost. Then, on January 1st, 1148, they faced Sultan Masuda at the treacherous Meander River. Masud set a trap, drawing them into difficult terrain, but the Crusaders forced a passage across the river and, in a crucially close-quarters victory, captured the Turkish camp. This momentary success boosted spirits and alleviated some of their supply problems.
But it didn't last.
No, the reprieve was short-lived. On January 8, while crossing the enormous mountain of Cadmus, a critical tactical error by Geoffrey of Rossan, leading the vanguard, separated the army, left a vulnerable gap. Masud seized the opportunity, ambushing the exposed 10-kilometer-long baggage train. Panic spread. Louis himself, leading the rear guard, rushed forward, fighting with incredible personal courage. He was nearly captured.
The king himself.
Yes. His royal guard were killed at his side, and he famously had to nimbly and bravely scale a rock to escape. This uncharted appearance in the thick of the fighting may well have saved him from recognition and capture. Though the French suffered enormous casualties, the army, remarkably, remained intact more than could be said for Conrad III and his forces.
That's incredible personal bravery from Louis, but it sounds like a catastrophic logistical failure overall.
It absolutely was. After this harrowing defeat, Louis wisely placed command of the army with the Knights Templar, led by Grand Master Everard de Bar. He divided the army into disciplined units, bringing some much-needed order. But by the time they reached Edessa on January 20, they were hungry and exhausted, morale shattered. Critically, there weren't enough Byzantine ships to transport everyone across the sea.
So what happened?
Shamefully, Louis was persuaded to board with the knightly elite, leaving the bulk of the infantry and non-combatants to carry on overland.
They just left them, abandoned them.
Pretty much. Sailed away with the knights and the nobles. Many of these abandoned pilgrims perished from Turkish attacks or starvation. Some, in a truly desperate act, even took service with the Sultan of Rome, effectively renouncing Christianity simply to survive. It highlights a profound logistical failure that directly led to the army's effective disintegration, a stark contrast to the First Crusade's cohesiveness.
So, with the shattered remnants of their armies, the European monarchs finally reached the Holy Land. But they faced a critical decision about their next move. Louis, Eleanor, and the high-ranking French finally reached Antioch on March 19, 1148. Welcomed by Raymond of Poitiers, Eleanor's dashing uncle. His lavish court delighted the queen, a stark contrast to the hardship they'd just endured.
And Raymond had a plan.
He urged Louis to attack Aleppo, argued it was the perfect time due to the ongoing Zengid civil conflict between Nur ad-Din and Saqqif ad-Din. But Louis had a very different idea, rooted in his piety.
Leading to tension.
Palpable tension, and truly personal. Our sources note that Raymond and Louis were very different men. Raymond, charming, chivalrous warrior prince. Louis, pious, austere, obsessed with pilgrimage. Eleanor wanted to support her relative. She went so far as to proclaim that unless Louis joined her uncle's campaign, she would seek an annulment of their marriage. Wow. A public challenge.
Huge. Louis, enraged by this challenge to his authority, reportedly placed her under house arrest and promptly left for Palestine, primarily to rebuild his army with fresh crusaders arriving by sea in Jerusalem and to fulfill his pious desire to visit the holy city itself. This dramatic confrontation was a critical rupture in their relationship, reflecting broader issues between their personalities, their agendas for the crusade, ultimately a breakdown that would lead to their divorce.
Which brings us to a key moment. The Council of Acre, June 24, 1148.
Yes. A gathering of King Louis, King Conrad, who had made his way to Jerusalem, fresh crusaders who had arrived by sea from Lisbon, and the local forces of the crusader states. The assembled army was easily the largest Christian army to arrive in Outremer since 1097 through 1099 minutes. Though estimates vary, maybe 2,000 knights and 10,000 infantry, similar in size to the First Crusade army at Jerusalem.
And the crucial strategic debate. What's the target?
Exactly. Most of the magnates of Jerusalem, the local experts, endorsed a campaign against Damascus. While Emir Unar of Damascus had been an ally against Zengi, he'd recently forged a new, unsettling alliance with Nur ad-Din of Aleppo, even married his daughter.
So attacking Damascus made sense strategically.
It made sense to try and prevent the powerful Zengids from bringing Damascus fully under their control. Conquest would solidify Frankish power in southern Syria and northern Palestine, provide a natural frontier of the eastern desert, and effectively split the Muslim world in two, cutting off Egypt from Zengid Syria. The Crusaders gambled on a quick conquest, possibly due to contacts with treacherous elements within the city and internal divisions hostile to the Zengids.
But Unar was ready for them.
Incredibly well prepared. Rumors of a Frankish attack had circulated since spring. He summoned local Arab tribes, alerted governors, posted scouts, crucially, cut off water supplies outside the city walls. Most importantly, he secured the help of the Zengid rulers Saif ad-Din and Nur ad-Din, who, despite their earlier conflict, put aside their civil conflict to organize their troops in response to Unar's appeal. This unity proved decisive.
So the Crusaders went for Damascus. How did that siege unfold?
The combined Christian army, led by Louis, Conrad, and Baldwin III, mustered at Tiberias and arrived before Damascus on July 24. They approached from the west, where immense orchards provided defensive cover and provisions. Conrad III's German knights, fighting on foot in the dense orchards, bravely drove Muslim forces back and secured the Barada River, placing the Christians well-positioned to launch an assault with access to water.
Sounds promising initially.
It did, but after just 2 days of attacks, the city did not fall. Ibn al-Qalanisi, the Damascus chronicler who was present and provides arguably the most accurate account, noted Muslim reinforcements were arriving in constantly increasing numbers. The Crusaders had gambled on a quick conquest, but resistance was more stubborn than expected. Furthermore, the arrival of Nur-ad-Din and Saif-ad-Din with their large unified armies effectively surrounding the Crusaders.
Left them no choice.
Exactly. It left the Crusaders with no option but to withdraw. After only a 4-day siege, an incredibly short duration for such a major objective.
4 days. That's it.
Yeah, just 4 days. The Christian army retreated in good order at dawn on July 28th, back to Jerusalem. Although the Crusader forces remained intact, they achieved nothing. This final, humiliating failure marked the definitive end of the Second Crusade in the Eastern Levant. A stark disappointment.
So, what does this all mean? What's the fallout? The failure before Damascus brought the Second Crusade to a dismal, anticlimactic end in the East. Conrad departed quickly September 8th, harboring bitter feelings toward the nobility of the Latin East, whom he felt had betrayed him. He immediately sailed to Constantinople, aligning with Manuel against their mutual enemy, Roger II of Sicily.
And Louis.
Louis remained until Easter 1149. Desperate to do some good, apparently, but also grappling with Eleanor's relentless determination to end their marriage. Louis was firmly convinced Manuel Comnenus had played a key role in the failure, believing he had deliberately undermined the crusade. His suspicions only solidified when he was briefly detained by a Byzantine fleet on his way home.
And the reaction back in Europe?
Across Christendom, there was palpable sorrow and deep recrimination. Some churchmen openly criticized the enterprise, accused its leaders of arrogance, immorality, and rapacity. Pope Eugenius III lamented the most severe injury of the Christian name that God's church has suffered in our time. A later pope, Hadrian IV, perhaps hit the nail on the head, criticizing Louis VII for undertaking the crusade with little caution, suggesting a lack of preparation, of foresight.
So the blame fell on the leaders.
Largely. Our sources explain that Louis and Conrad organized large, splendid armies, but failed to take steps toward maintaining discipline and unity or toward ensuring the steady flow of supplies. They placed too much reliance on Manuel, who proved to be a poor ally.
Which raises a truly important question for us. What separated the dramatic failures from the surprising successes in this Second Crusade? What were the lessons learned? Future Crusader leaders like Frederick Barbarossa and Richard the Lionheart clearly learned crucial lessons from this debacle. Our sources highlight their meticulous codes of conduct for their armies and strict enforcement, a direct response to the chaos that plagued Louis and Conrad's forces.
How so? What did they do differently?
Richard, for example, organized and controlled his own fleet. He even conquered his own supply base at Cypresses, demonstrating a remarkable resourcefulness that Louis and Conrad critically lacked, ensuring independence from unreliable allies like the Byzantines. Barbarossa would also crush the Seljuk Turks on the battlefield numerous times in 1190 by carefully organizing his march across Anatolia, effectively dominating the Byzantines when they proved treacherous rather than passively accepting their manipulation.
And what about Bernard of Clairvaux, the driving force behind it all? How did he justify such a profound failure after promising divine blessings?
Bernard, despite facing immense criticism, bravely defended his role in De Consideratione, a significant theological work written between 1149 and 1152. He blamed sin as the main cause for failure, but also acknowledged the finality of divine judgment impenetrable to the minds of men, essentially saying God's ways are beyond human understanding.
Shifting the blame somewhat.
You could see it that way. He powerfully compared the Crusaders to the disobedient Hebrews of the Old Testament wandering in the wilderness, casting himself and the Pope as Moses and Aaron, leading a flawed but chosen people. He famously stated, "I would rather that men murmur against us than against God," indicating his willingness to be God's shield against popular criticism. This theological interpretation, blaming moral failings, not divine plan or church leadership, profoundly influenced subsequent church thought on crusading.
So even with the Eastern failure, was it all negative for the Crusader movement overall?
Not entirely, no. Otto of Freising notes the memory of the Eastern campaign lingered long throughout Christendom and cooled enthusiasm for Holy Land Crusades for at least a generation. True. However, the Crusader states themselves didn't immediately decline. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, in fact, grew in strength and wealth. famously conquering Ascalon in 1153, razing new castles. Military orders like the Templars and Hospitallers gained significant endowments, deployed increasingly strong forces.
And crusading continued elsewhere.
Exactly. It continued to evolve, became even more prominent on the northern and Iberian fronts. Rulers established their own military orders, continued territorial expansion, building on those successes we discussed. The Second Crusade ultimately produced wildly mixed results, but it provides a striking picture of Latin Christendom in the middle of the 12th century, revealing a civilization undeniably on the rise. The fact that increasingly wealthy, well-equipped kings of France and Germany were leading substantial offensives shows a new level of power, of organizational capacity emerging in Europe.
And a sign of unity, despite the failures.
Yes, it also demonstrates the increasing religious unity of Latin Europe, amounting in many ways to a certain political unity, expressed in an almost continent-wide joint enterprise from Portugal to the Slavic Northeast, Italy to England. This unity, a powerful product of the First Crusade's triumph, would continue to deepen and define the High Middle Ages.
So from the dramatic fall of Edessa to the triumphs in Iberia, the complex and ambiguous outcomes in the north, and the struggles and ultimate failure of the main armies in the east. The Second Crusade truly was a deep dive into the aspirations, realities, and sometimes harsh lessons of medieval warfare and faith on a continental scale.
Which leaves us with an important question for you, the listener, to consider. While the Second Crusade in the East is often singularly seen as this crushing failure, its multi-front nature, the long-term successes in Iberia, the brutal but influential precedent set in the North, it all suggests it was less a singular catastrophe and more a pivotal transformative moment. It revealed both the evolving ambitions and the varied capabilities of Latin Christendom, and it forced a reevaluation of what a holy war truly entailed. So how might our understanding of crusading change when viewed through these widely divergent lenses beyond just the familiar narrative of failure in the Levant?
Something to think about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep taking those deep dives.